right. So perfect. We have our trendsetter session, and it is, again, my privilege to introduce Isaac Sacolick. Isaac is joining us from his home north of New York City. So we'd like to welcome you, Isaac. And just to give a little background, Isaac, I'm not sure there's anything you haven't done. Successful CIO, author, influencer, just an amazing background, and we're very privileged to have you on the marathon today.
Eric, thank you for having me. Thank you, Creatio, for having me at this wonderful event. Welcome to all the low coders who are getting ready to do your marathon. I've been a big fan of low code platforms for 2 decades now. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through my keynote today. But Eric, you have a wonderful lineup, a lot of good learning activities, and I hope everybody takes a break from your activities and your normal work and spend some time learning with you guys in terms of some of the things that you guys can do and some of your capabilities. You could see a little bit about my background here, just to round it out. I've been a CIO, I've been a CTO, I've done a lot of product development. Along the journey, I did a lot of writing and speaking that led me to write a book called Driving Digital that published in 2017 and became a bestseller in 2019. And of all the things I love to do is I love sharing what I've learned, and I love being out in the field learning more and being able to share it. So that's what I'm going to do today, is share a little bit of how I got to Driving Digital and a lot more in terms of how everybody on this video and this learning can use some of the tools and techniques that I applied first as a CTO, then as a CIO, and now as president of a company called Star CIO, where we help organizations drive digital transformations. So what's always been on the top of my mind is digital leadership, right? That magic that starts at the top, that works its way down across the organization, but also works its way up. And what I mean by that is leaders being able to collaborate with people working in the field, working with customers, working in marketing and technology, finding out what customers want, finding out what the market is asking them to do, and looking to evolve the products and services that they are offering their constituents. And so that search for digital leadership started in 2016 for me. I was interviewed by Forbes at the time. I did a Gartner webinar, a Gartner workshop, and they mentioned this word called digital transformation. And I said, I've been doing digital transformation my entire career. I've been helping organizations do more with data and technology, with workflow, and becoming more digitally sound in terms of the way they're collaborating. And so it was at one of these events back in 2016 that I came up with the outline for the book. You could see it here. It's all about becoming smarter, faster, safer, and innovative. We're going to talk a lot about that over this keynote. And you could see some of the elements that I speak about in the book, things that you should be well understood for those of you who are using low-code platforms, things like citizen development, workforce enablement, particularly on the sales and marketing side, being more agile across the organization, not just in IT, using data and analytics to really drive the business, and focusing on customer experience and sales and marketing intelligence. When you put all those things together and you're really listening to what the market and customers are telling you, you have a great chance at evolving your organization. And that makes me think about what digital leadership is going to look like over the next 10 years, particularly in 2021, 2022, as we're gotten this pivot from COVID, from hybrid working, from this new ability to use digital technologies across the organization. And if you do pick up a copy of my book, this is the lens that I leave the book with. It's what I call the driving digital lens. And you could see it's about connecting people with technology, with process in the middle. It's about changing your business models to digital ecosystems and working with customers around experiences and innovation. And what I like to tell people about this digital lens. Particularly I do a lot of talks with the technology side of the house, the CIOs, the chief technology officers, and the digital officers. And what I tell them is, look, when you're implementing digital technologies, it's not just about efficiencies and quality and taking cost out. It's really about using technical capabilities to grow the business. And so I really like hearing about customer facing technologies, about ways to make sales more enabled, to work with customers, about you putting up more capabilities to automate in digital marketing. And that to me is really what digital transformation is all about. Now, when I do these talks, and I can't wait to do these talks in person, and I hope to start being able to do that at the end of this year, I usually get three different types of questions from people about digital transformation. And these were questions that were coming to me early on, but they continue to evolve because anyone who's investing in digital transformation and digital technologies knows that this isn't something that you do in a 6-month project and it's one and done. So the first question people ask me is, how big is this? And I went searching for some research around this, and Deloitte has some really good research that suggests that even those on the lower side of the maturity curve are able to see 15% revenue and profit growth as they improve their digital maturity. And those who are that are more mature are able to see 45% growth. That to me is amazing. When we started this 4 or 5 years ago, it was very easy to get trapped up and say, oh, this isn't going to make a big change to our companies. And what you're finding is, as companies become more mature, particularly in the areas of sales and marketing and innovation, the things that are growing the business, you're starting to see that lift. In terms of how long, about half of this survey from Forrester and from Blake Morgan, the Blake Morgan Forrester one said about 56% take about a year or two to start seeing business impact from their investments. And Blake Morgan had some examples where it could take organizations several more years. And the reason is depends on what you call your MVP. It depends how long it takes things to roll out. And it depends on the size of your business and how many different areas that you're evolving to become more digital. So we're on a journey, and we're not just one and done in 2021. We're going to be doing this well into this decade. A third thing people ask me is, what should we really focus on? And the first thing I tell people is focus on the collaboration between technology, data, and business. I think it's critically important to have IT leaders involved. And when you look at what IT leaders are doing, this is coming from IDG State of the CIO. They're spending their time on both sides of the house, the cost side in terms of automating business, and the front side of the house in terms of automating the customer journey and improving it and developing it. So those are the three things and three areas that organizations are really focused on. And this is common across industries. So the question is, what happens if you fall behind? What happens if you're not running at the pace of other industries or others in your industry? And I like to tell people, I had a front row seat to this. One of my first startups going back into the late 90s was helping newspapers go from print to digital. And you could see in the years from 1996 to 2001, as the internet grew market, newspapers grew with it. But then when there was an inflection point, and I think COVID is actually another inflection point, those who hadn't really modernized their platforms, hadn't become digital, hadn't evolved their business models, in the newspaper industry, it became a very steep fall after that. I think that's still falling. They had multiple waves of disruptors hitting them. And that's why I think it's so important for organizations to be really thinking about going smarter and faster through this, because you never know when something's going to happen like a COVID, and you have to start really thinking about how to become a digital and a low code platform type of company. So let's talk about this, right? Everybody's doing digital. Everybody is doing some of the same things. What some of the groups aren't doing is looking for what I call force multipliers. That means putting multiple things together, multiple practices, technologies, people together, where the combination gives you that force multiplier, and you're actually driving transformation faster than your peers. When you talk about transformation, everybody is looking for the things that are going to transform the culture. That means going past the way you used to do things, going past silos, finding ways to collaborate, recognizing that status quo isn't good enough, and looking for ways to bring the entire organization on the journey of changing and evolving how you're working as a business and how you're collaborating every 6 months, right? This is not something that's going to say what you're doing today is going to be good enough in 2022. We're going to constantly ask questions and reevaluate it. Now at Star CIO, we've found a way to measure transformative culture, and we do it in 4 dimensions. And you've heard me say this already. It starts really about doing 2 things at the same time, not just by going fast. We know we can go really fast, and not just about being smart. It's really about finding the balance between being smart and using data and analytics, but also making decisions without perfect data, without having all the answers in front of you. And that really comes down to how well you're experimenting as an organization, learning and using that feedback to evolve your processes. The second 2 areas come down to innovation and safety, right? We want to bring new capabilities to our organization. We want to showcase to our customers ways that we're differentiating, but we need to do this in a safer way and a secure way, particularly in industries that are where human safety is involved. So if you want a transformative culture, these are the 4 attributes that I advise organizations to focus on. And how do you do this? Well, it starts at the top. I said that digital leadership is really important. The top of the house needs to make sure that the organization is aligned on strategy, vision, goals, priorities, and KPIs. And out of all these things, I think vision is most important. Why is that? Because when you bring teams together, whether it's a 4-person team or a 40-person team, they need to know what the North Star looks like. Where are you heading? And that's going to evolve over time as you get smarter and you're learning, but to be aligned in terms of direction of where you're going and why you're doing certain things and what customer segments and what are the value propositions and why an investment is strategic. These are all important factors in putting into vision statements. And I've done a lot of writing and speaking of late around this, because as we evolve what our digital transformation strategies are, we need to make sure our organizations understand what those new visions are. Now, once the organization is aligned, then we need to understand who and how we're going to go on this journey. We're not just talking about people in our organization. We're talking about bringing expertise from partners, using freelancers, but also investing in the learning that our organization's doing from customers, but also learning around new skills. In terms of the how, we'll talk a lot about Agile in this talk, but it's really about using practices that enable experimentation. And that's why Agile is so important. That's why becoming data-driven is so important. And even automation, right? Automation is something that's going to take a lot of the repetitive tasks, the orchestration that we do, take that away from people's time and enable us to use more of our time to listen to customers and do more innovative things with them. Lastly, we're going to talk about the platforms that make this successful and how to use platforms and use technologies and infrastructure as a way to bring our organization together in terms of how we're evolving our digital capabilities. Now, to get your 2 times multiplier, to get your force multiplier, it's really about bringing these capabilities together, right? You can't just bring talent in without process. You can't have process in without technology. And so we're really trying to, again, do multiple things in collaboration together to be able to bring force multipliers together. So let's talk about that through a little bit deeper, right? Let's get beyond, transformative culture and share how organizations really do this. And the 2 places I want you to think about and put a lens to is what Agile means to your organization and what innovation means to your organization. So let's look at that from a lens, and let's look at some things that we know are not Agile and not innovation, right? Analyzing things for too long. I remember in the days of enterprises, we used to have to go through long processes to get investments, to be able to justify a 3-year return on investment, long-term longitudinal market research studies. And we know that that level of analysis is just going to force us to fall behind. So we know analysis paralysis isn't going to get us to become an agile or innovative organization. We also know that becoming a laggard and waiting for too long, waiting for our customers to come to our doorstep and say, you missed an opportunity, or you have problems with your experience, and they're screaming louder and louder, and maybe you don't even have the right tools and mechanisms in place to even hear those things. That's not going to get us to becoming an agile, innovative organization. So we know many of the pictures that look like we're falling behind and we're not agile, we're not innovative. Let's look at some of the things that are agile and innovative. And I like to look at some examples, starting with agile teams. What makes an agile team so successful is empowering them to commit to how much work they can get done, whether you're doing 1 or 2 week sprints. And I'm always looking for a multidisciplinary, diverse team to raise their hands and saying, we're going to figure this out together. So this is what an agile team looks to me. And then what an innovation looks to me is not just being able to deliver new capabilities to customers, but to have a sustainable practice of doing this over and over again. And you can see this data from Statista. The companies that you probably know already, but they do this through measurement, that have consistently delivered new innovation capabilities in different industries. So something very important to be able to do if you're going to continue to drive transformation and enable digital capabilities over the long period. So how do we do this? We have to break some fallacies. And the first fallacy is that people know what they want, okay? That we can really formulate requirements, that we understand exactly how to fulfill our vision, that we can build blueprints out that say exactly what a user experience needs to be. And that's the first fallacy. The second is that we can draw a Gantt-like timeline to get us from where we are today to where we want to be on our vision. Right? We know the world isn't perfect. We're going to learn along that journey. We're going to have changing requirements. We want to set up a process so that we can continue to learn from those experiences. And over the years, we've called that process agile. We've moved projects to a much higher level of success around them. But you can see we still have room to grow. Right? We still have ways to improve our agile delivery. So I want to share some examples of how to do this. And it starts with getting beyond agile, beyond what teams think of as a single sprint scrum, right? This is what agile means to most organizations, to most teams. They're starting at the beginning of the sprint. They're doing a bunch of rituals. They're getting to a review at the end, and then they're doing their retrospective. And that's really helps execution. It means teams are narrowly focused on what's been prioritized for them. But what we find is that in order to really get that digital lens around things, we need to apply Agile not in delivery, but also in planning, how we plan our initiatives, how we release new capabilities to customers, and how we monitor what comes out of this from customers. And this is really the heart of one of the programs that I've been building throughout my career. I call it Star CIO Agile. It's really about bringing Agile to deliver roadmaps, technology standards, and we do this through a continuous planning program. Every sprint, you're not just delivering stories, you're not just delivering releases every sprint, you're also planning your next few sprints ahead, and that's going to start giving you a picture of your roadmap. And we use techniques like estimation to be able to make sure that we prioritize the things that have the most value that are feasible. So just a little bit about one of my frameworks. And how do you get to a force multiplier around this is a few areas. Number one, teams are not just technology or not just marketing or not just data scientists. They're really truly multidisciplined. Again, they're planning and delivering at the same sprint. So that's what continuous planning is all about. They're not only empowering teams with self-organizing practices, but you're also building standards and centers of excellence, right? This is how you have uniform customer experiences. This is how you have better data collection, because you're starting to create practices that enable that. And you're using planning and estimating and feedback to start building roadmaps are. Because while teams can focus on what they're doing every sprint, businesses transform by being able to understand where's the organization going and how they're going to achieve their visions. So that's the first area of force multiplying that I'd like to share with you. The second area is really around low code. And as I explained to Eric when we started, I've been doing low code for my entire career. I've been quoted by CXO Talk and others about it being one of the most important tools that technology has to empower their organization with. And in itself, it can become a force multiplier. I've been writing, again, for 15 years. I have over 700 articles. If you want access to my dashboard that has all of the articles that I've ever written, find me as NY Ike on Twitter. I'll send a link out for everybody to this dashboard. This dashboard and all the integration behind it are built on low-code tools. Just to give you a sense, over the last 5 years, I've been doubling down the amount of writing I've been doing about low code as really a true platform enabler for organizations that are driving transformation. And there's a really good reason for it. I was brought up as a software developer. I love coding. I love solving problems. You know, it takes some skill and craft and science to be able to do this. But, you know, when you're building things with code, there's also a lot of scaffolding. It's a word we like to use in technology, the things that enable the technology teams to deliver with code. Things like building test-driven development environments, all the DevOps environments that we need. And then we're left with a question: is what we build maintainable? If I write 1,000 lines of code and I move on to work on another application, can somebody really support what I developed? Or are they going to have a hard time learning all that code that I had built? So just, there's a lot of pros to building code, but there are also some cons that we have to think about. Then I think about what it means to be working in a low-code environment like a Creatio. In this case, what you're seeing on the right-hand side is a way of doing a flow around lead generation. And what I love about this is a flow like this not only provides a capability, but it's self-documenting. If I'm working with one of my business partners and they say, how do you qualify leads? I can click into that and show that person what the business logic is around that. And if I bring on another developer, they have a visual tool to be able to understand and delve into what changes are required. So what are some of the pros? It's visual. It's open to be integrated with other platforms. It comes with templates as starting points, and often you're getting a out-of-the-box DevOps environment to work with. What teams need to ask questions around is, how do you create governance around how you build an end-to-end process around it, and focus on the types of work that are really going to bring value first. People ask me, how do you prioritize in low code? Well, prioritize the things that are most important, and then show that your platforms can deliver against this. So what is the low code multiplier around this? Well, number one, co-create. Instead of having one team create requirements and another team fulfill it, bring that team together, because you have an environment where you can test and experiment right with your stakeholders and see whether something that they're describing is really going to work. Create centers of excellence, right? Centers of excellence enable you to find ways to reuse, to build standards, and to create skill sets that go wide in your organization. And then leverage partners, right? Especially when you're starting out on a new platform, there's a lot of best practices that you could start out with, and partners is a really good way to get that force multiplier and say, let's get to that time to value, then let's start having our teams learn how to do this themselves, and then let's start building centers of excellence around this. Now, the last area I'm going to focus on in terms of finding force multipliers is really looking for transformations. And where I started is think through leadership, think through how you create a value proposition that people understand, make sure it's communicated. But what I also tell leaders is the number one reasons digital transformations fail is they're not listening to their employees, they're not engaging them, they're not empowering them to make their own decisions in self-organizing teams, and they're not using tools like low code to enable them to fulfill experiments and innovations. So how do we solve for this? Okay, first and foremost, transformations start by having a transformation calling. What are the big things that your organization is going to do over the next 6, 12, and 18 months that are going to move the needle, and make sure that you communicate what those big bets are. Make sure that more and more of your teams and your technologies and your processes are aligned to this, but more importantly, reduce the noise in areas that are less important. You know, when I talk to an organization that has 300 people and has 60 priorities, or an organization that has 2,000 people and has 200 priorities, I can already tell them, look, let's take a step back and start prioritizing, because you're not going to get all of this done if you try to get too many things done and your teams and your technologies are spread too thin. The last part of this is really focusing on changing both the business and the delivery model. And I do this with Agile, I do this with low code, and I do this with data-driven and self-service technologies. These are the baselines where I think organizations truly need to be able to evolve their organizations, and being able to put something out, whether it's an end user who is an employee or to a customer, find out what's working, what needs to change, what needs to be improved on, and use that feedback to go back and use your very versatile, very easy to use tools to go and involve the experiences that you're putting in front of them. All right, so what is the force multiplier here? Again, using Agile and low code to rapidly innovate, using both automation and integration as a way to simplify what you're building, and then using people from across your organizations through learning, using partners, developing centers of excellence. And when you put all of that together, you start getting to being able to deliver on that digital lens, right? You're evolving your organization in terms of what you're delivering, what your business's models are, how you're working with customers, how you're handling new regulations as those change, and being able to experiment with things like new technologies and new data sources to deliver new capabilities. So I hope you learned a lot from my Driving Digital presentation today. I look forward to hearing about more what happens through the Low Code Marathon. If you want to learn more about all the leadership that I share, this is my blog. It's what I write for InfoWorld. It's my channel on YouTube, 5 Minutes with NY Ike. The best way to do that is through my newsletter that you see at the URL below. And then a little bit about Star CIO. We help organizations develop their centers of excellence. You can see they cover many of the areas that we talked about today, from innovation to Agile and to low code centers of excellence. And if you have any questions after this presentation, the best way to reach me is through Twitter at NYIke, NYIke on Twitter. Thanks, Eric. It's been great. And thank you, Creatio, for having me speak today.
Isaac, what an amazing, amazing presentation, and the chat is on fire with a lot of questions here. So before I jump into the questions themselves, there's a couple of comments that I really liked in here, and one comes from Melinda, and it's actually a kind of an analogy, and I just have to find it in the chat. Bear with me here a second, but the analogy really is about digital transformation being is like training for a marathon, no pun intended. And every lap around the transformation training track is 6 months, and it's continual. And I think that that is a nice analogy to exactly what we were talking about in your presentation. And the other comment that I had, nothing tells you that digital transformation and having a mature strategy is fundamental to any organization. The statistic that you throw up at the beginning of the presentation, revenue and profit growth, they recognize 15 to 45% higher profit growth with organizations that are more mature. that tells you this is what you need to focus on. So perfect. So if you're up for it,
Great.
I'd like to ask you a couple of questions from the audience here.
Awesome.
Uh,
Love it.
all right, perfect. So the first two I'm going to actually combine because they're somewhat related. So question comes in and it says, "What are the most important elements of digital transformation?" And I'll tack on to that by saying, where do companies get started? Right? What is the most important things that they should be focused on?
Yeah, it's a great question, because what I tell folks is the worst thing you can do is not realize that you have to transform what you're doing, and you miss the starting gun, and it's much harder to run a marathon when you're a few minutes behind, and you have to play catch up. I think that's actually a really good analogy because
Mhm.
what I tell organizations is you're going to feel that transformation fatigue, right? That, the fifth mile fatigue when you are running a marathon. I don't do marathons, I do centuries on bikes, but somewhere about 20% into it, you start feeling that fatigue and you have to paddle your way through it to get to that zone where you're really focused. But for organizations that are just starting out, I think it's really important to take a step back and look at customers and look at products and look at markets. If you're not starting any kind of transformation through the lens of what business that you want to be in, what markets you want to serve, what does the new competition look like? When I was working with newspapers, they saw their neighboring newspaper, in New York, the New York Times versus the Daily News versus the New York Post. Those were their competition, but their competition really wasn't that. It was eBay and Craigslist, and later on Facebook and Google, who are coming in with new capabilities that were very different, new ways to serve markets that were very different. You're seeing this across different industries, right? In banking, you're seeing whereas 85% of banking were in branches 5 to 10 years ago, and now it's probably about 50% digital. So a big part of this is just starting with, what do I need to do different with my customers that I want to start as a set of experiments, right? It doesn't have to be a moonshot, particularly for lagging organizations. It's, where can I start doing some experiments and learning more about what customers need differently than what I'm doing today. And then when you start having a number of those experiments, then you can start your transformation journey. And I talk a lot about that in the book. That it's better not to have a strategy up front. It's better to start out with a bunch of experiments. And then as you start getting some data and some learning, then bring a group together and say, here's our formal strategy and vision of what we're trying to accomplish.
Mhm. Which brings me into the next question, and it's kind of timely for that. Can you remind everybody how they can get the book?
Very easy. I have a convenient URL for it, driving-digital.com/purchase. And that will take you right to the Amazon page, at least in the US. Or you could just do look up my last name, Sacolick, Sacolick on Amazon, and you should be able to find the book. If you can't, find me on Twitter again, NY Ike, and I will send you the links there as well.
Yeah, there's no excuse, audience. You can find that book.
It's only $7 on Kindle. It's a bargain.
There we go. There we go. Perfect. So the next question I have, Isaac, is really, and you touched on this quite a bit in the presentation. When we look at transformational strategies, what should a company's culture typically embrace, right? What does a company need to embrace as a culture to be effective in their digital transformation strategies?
Oh, wow. I think I could write a whole nother book
Yeah,
around that
right.
one. So first and foremost, it starts with enabling more people in the organization to ask questions, right? You can't challenge the status quo without hearing sales, marketing, operations, technologists coming together in a very collaborative way and say, why are we doing this? What can we learn from a customer? How is a competitor doing something differently? So I think key tenet for anyone that's trying to transform is asking questions. The second thing that comes to my mind is, we used to call it fail fast. I actually don't like the word fail fast. I mean, say that to the CFO and say that to the board, and sometimes they get a little queasy around that. But a culture of experimentation and really rapid experimentation, right? Can we put something in front of customers, and it could be a wireframe all the way to a POC. It can be, doing A/B testing in your marketing exercises. It could have 3 sales groups coming out with 3 different pitches and trying to figure out which one is working. There's lots of ways to try experimentation and using that data to come back and learn from that experience. And I think the third part is really that data part. It's that being able to use technologies and tools in such a way that you're going to showcase the data, and when I tell companies, share the data first. Don't share the insight. Just show the data, because that individuals are going to look at a dashboard or look at a report and maybe interpret things slightly differently from their perspectives. Have a conversation around what insights are being drawn from it, and then start asking questions like, what actions do we want to take around this? So 3 different areas around transformation culture that I think are really important.
Perfect. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And I loved when you said, you have to have that bottom up approach as well, because so many times when we look at digital transformation, it's important to have that top down approach as well, and someone delivering that message. But you can't forget that as well. It's when they meet in the middle is when we see successful transformation. Perfect. And I'm trying to find, there was another one in here that was very, very interested into, let's see here. Yes. All right. So let's see here. Do we have, do we see low code as a driver of change in organizations?
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Look, the reason is, people still have this perception in the organization that technology is hard. And the reality is technology is hard. Okay, it's not easy to build technology the right way the first time. It's not easy to build things using proprietary methods. And what I tell most leaders is, look, you hear about the innovations coming from Facebook and from Google and from Microsoft and Apple. Most of the companies on this call do not have the depth of technology skills and technology awareness to be able to do things the way they're doing it. So we look for ways that can deliver innovation, that can deliver integration and automation and workflow, but not necessarily have to do everything in a proprietary way and everything in a way that these other companies that are so technology savvy they can do. And that's really where low code fits a major problem statement for organizations. How can we put an MVP up in front of customers or in front of end users in that first sprint and start getting feedback? I have an article around this in InfoWorld just in the last few weeks that talks about when you're building applications out, for example, you used to go through, let's conceptualize it, let's build a wireframe out, let's build out the architecture. And so even though we're agile, we're still doing a lot of upfront work to make sure we're aligned over what we're building and how we're building it, what the experience is. But when I could start with a low code platform and say, let's go prototype something, let's go put this in front of 10 people and see what their feedback is. Are we heading in the right direction? And you know what? If you're not, you haven't really invested in. You could turn the switch off and go in a different direction. And if you are, then you have something that you can baseline and go after it. So, like I said, I've been doing low code for 20 years. I've been doing it across different platforms. I've built customer-facing platforms out of it. I've done citizen development where I've handed tools to people outside of IT as a CIO. I've built governance models around that so that it can continue to thrive. And I think this is one of the major game changers, particularly for medium-sized organizations that know they need a differentiator with technology and data, but can't do it the same way that Facebook's and Google's can do it.
Absolutely. And of course, coming from Creatio perspective, we agree with that. Absolutely. Well, Isaac, I think that brings us, to our time. I would like to thank you again. This has been very insightful. A lot of great
Thank you.
questions coming in. Hopefully, our folks monitoring the chat helped you out answering some of those. But again, folks, buy the book, follow Isaac online. There's just a tremendous amount of experience and thought leadership that he brings to the table. So again, we've had a wonderful time having you here on our low code marathon, Isaac. And we hope that you'll join us again at one of our future events.
I'd love that. Thank you again, Eric, and thanks to the entire Creatio team. And good luck on your low code learning over the next couple weeks.
Thank you again.